Greetings, everybody. I was discussing retirement plans with my father, and one thing I mentioned was that his money would go further in Mexico than it does here in the US. But later that night, I thought about how much more insecure and dangerous Mexico seems to be in comparison to the US. And it got me thinking that perhaps the stresses and leisures end up being about the same for a lot of people, whether they retire in the US or Mexico. You see, in Mexico, you'd have less financial stress because your American retirement dollars would go further. However, with the violence and extortion that are often talked about, your societal pressures would likely be greater than here in the US because you may have to be a little extra careful and watchful and perhaps even limit your activities to the daytime. In the US, your financial pressures would be higher than in Mexico because of the higher cost of living here. And so you'd have to be a bit more careful and frugal with how you spend your money in the US if you want it to last the entirety of your retirement. But the societal pressures here would be less because even though there is crime and tragedies do happen here, I think the US as a whole may be at least a bit safer than many parts of Mexico. Thus, as depicted by this diagram, I think the overall pressure and or leisure would be the same in both countries for many people. The decision you would have to make is which arrangement would you prefer? The low financial but high societal pressure, or the high financial with low societal pressure? Of course, however, if you have a superabundance of retirement savings, then you wouldn't have to worry much about spending frugally, and you could live in the US with low financial and low societal pressure. But for many Americans, the decision would be something more along the lines of this diagram. So, for the sake of conversation, which option would you prefer?